All indications point to Cody Bellinger opting in to his contract for the 2025 season with the Cubs. What would that mean for this roster and the construction of this roster that we honestly don't know a whole lot about the direction? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Oakland A's and the Chicago White Sox, who are having a pretty emotional week as some history continues as well. That and more on this edition of the Cubs Baseball Channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. Get in that comment section. Let us know how you feel about the Cubs, Bellinger, and the playoff race. Here's your invitation to our show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cubs Baseball Channel. My name is Anthony Pasquale. That's Mick Gillespie. You can find him on Twitter at Broadcaster Mick, and I'm at Ant_Pasquale3. No game to get into as the Cubs were off yesterday, but the one thing that seems to keep popping up in the rumor mill is that the Cubs feel like Cody Bellinger will opt into his contract for 2025. Remember, we were all hammering for it last offseason. The Cubs needed to sign Cody Bellinger to get that deal done. They signed him to a 3-year, $60 million or $80 million contract, and with an opt-out after each of the first two seasons. So he could opt out after 2024. He could opt out after 2025. And I think initially a lot of people thought he would play well again and then opt out and try to get more money elsewhere. But battling a couple injuries, getting moved out of center field, it kind of was a bad recipe for him to improve his stock. And as he's due, I believe, $27 million in 2025, it's hard to imagine that any other big league club would offer him more than that on an annual basis. So for those reasons, it feels like Bellinger's going to opt in.
Well, that's what everybody's saying. It started with Bob Nightingale, USA Today, and then now all of a sudden The Athletic is saying that it's not a decision hasn't been totally made, but that's what they're thinking, that he's going to opt back in. And that just tells you that he doesn't have any other options. I mean, he's not going to get a better deal going somewhere else, which is surprising because we would have thought last year when the Cubs were making this deal that if you would have got him for 3 years and the money that they spent, that he wouldn't have done it, right? Because they were talking about his agent, Scott Boras, getting way more, maybe double the contract and double the years, but it just hasn't materialized, So it's not like he's had a bad season with the Cubs. He hasn't had an MVP type season. But it looks like he's going to come back, and I'm kind of up in the air on this. I like Bellinger. I think he's a good player, but when I look at the Cubs organization, I feel like if he comes back, then you're going to have to make some moves other places because you've got so many outfielders that need time, and he's just not going to start in center field. So they're going to have to figure out another, and he's not going to play first base either. So they figured out both spots with young players. So where's he going to go? Was he going to go to left field? Is he going to go to right field? Is he going to be a platoon guy in a DH? I mean, that's the decision that they have to make. But the fact that you're not hearing other teams could be negotiating. Maybe they're just throwing it out there for teams to step up and say, hey, we're willing to do this. Or there's just not a market for him.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot, right? Because we don't know what other teams would be willing to give a guy who has, a history of injuries. This year, he hit 267 with 18 homers and 78 RBIs. A strong series against the Reds this weekend would put him at 20-80, which, it's above average, but not what you're paying $30 million for. And I don't think any other team is going to try to pay $30 million for that. And we know he's got above average defense at center field and first base, but so do Crow-Armstrong and Michael Busch, who are younger and more cost effective. So that leaves Bellinger with a few options, right? It's take the spot of Happ or Suzuki and left or right, probably leaning towards Suzuki and right and make him the DH. But all that does is continue to block guys like Alcantara and Casey and Canario and even Brendan Davis for more playing time. So that makes it a little bit interesting. From Bellinger's, bottom line perspective, it makes sense why he would opt in. He's comfortable here. He's getting paid a pretty penny and probably would be making more here than he would elsewhere. From a Cubs roster perspective, he obviously makes your team stronger in the short term, but in the long term, where does he factor in with some of these other guys that are going to be coming up? It's going to be something that they try to figure out. I wonder if he garners any type of trade value in the offseason. Like if he opts in and then the Cubs deal him, like that's a potential option.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other factor of that is if he does stick around, do the Cubs try to move Suzuki or somebody else to free up some at bats for these young guys that they have to see what they can do?
Who would you get rid of? Would you get rid of Suzuki or would you get rid of Ian Happ? I mean, I feel like it's easy to get rid of Mike Tauchman, who actually has been a pretty good player when he's been healthy. You got the Bellinger contract. Pete Crow-Armstrong's a young player under contract. So if it came down to those two guys, would you get rid of Ian Happ or would you get rid of Seiya Suzuki or would you keep both of them?
I think so. This is what my original thought was. The odd guy out was going to be Nico Horner, and what the Cubs would try to do would be leave right field open for Casey to go in and play. Seiya Suzuki becomes your DH. Cody Bellinger plays first, and Michael Busch plays second, which was my first, domino moving, trying to figure out where they'd go. Honestly, the guy that I'm least married to on the roster right now is Paredes, but I also think it's extremely unlikely that they would move him after just trading Christopher Morel and not really seeing much of him, because if that was the case, you could, put Busch at third and let Bellinger play first and then still keep right field open if you wanted to make that Juan Soto splash. But I just think right now it comes down to those four guys. It's Suzuki, it's Paredes, it's Horner, and it's Busch. And all of the Suzuki has a no trade clause. Busch just had a really strong rookie year and is cheap. Paredes they just got for Christopher Morel, which kind of makes me think Horner might be that guy that they try to move, but I don't know if that's the right move. I think he's a great second baseman, one of the best defensive guys in the league. And in terms of offensive value, there aren't too many second basemen better than he is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a tough move. But the problem is that the Cubs need superstars. I mean, they've got a lot of like role players, better than role players, but they just don't have those difference makers right now on this roster. So until they get those guys, they're going to have to make some moves. I mean, they got all these guys signed to these contracts 2-3 years, so maybe just next year. But at the end of the day, you're talking about an 80-win team. And 80, 83 wins, 84 wins isn't getting you into playoffs.
Yep.
So they need star power. And I think that's right now. And then some of you guys will get in here and you'll say, well, you know what? We like this team. They're star players. They've been shut out 15 times. I mean, the good teams aren't shut out 15 times. You're not going to win a World Series when you're shut out 15 times. Basically, when you run into the best pitchers, you're not scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And good teams figure out a way to do it. It may be a solo home run. It may be a 2-run home run. It may be, getting a guy on base, stealing second and singling him in. This team hasn't figured that out. This is 2 years now where you feel like when they're matched up against the best, they're just a very pedestrian team. So I think that the Cubs need to figure out what they're going to do. And then when they do it, they're just going to have to find they're going to have to get rid of some of the mediocre guys and add a star or two.
Yeah, I think the big question this offseason is where do the Cubs get a star and where does he fit on the roster? And that's what we'll kind of have to keep our eyes on for this offseason. The Cubs start their last homestand of the year today against the Cincinnati Reds at Wrigley Field. Jameson Taillon on the bump, 11-3 on the year with a 3.41 ERA, trying to finish strong for his second year in Cubby Blue. But there's three little pieces of MLB news I want to get into before we go today. Yesterday, the A's played their last game in Oakland. Not the best stadium in the world, but a really great baseball city. And you could just see how much the A's meant to those fans and how much not having the A's is going to hurt them.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to build these teams or work with these teams on getting them a stadium. And if you don't, they're going to go somewhere where a community is going to back them. And California hasn't really been too friendly to these teams. I hate to see them leave Oakland. But look, I mean, this is the third major league franchise to leave Oakland. The Raiders have already gone to Las Vegas. And don't forget, that so did the Warriors. The Warriors they didn't go to Nevada, but they went across the bay and went to San Francisco. So you either got to find a place for these teams to play. I've been to Oakland's, the Oakland Coliseum before. It's not very nice. It doesn't stand up to major league standards. If your city council and your politicians don't want to have major league sports, all they got to do is just keep voting down the moves that these teams want to make. And it got to the point where it felt to me, and I know some of you guys are going to disagree with this, but it felt to me like the local politicians, some of them wanted it, some of them didn't. They couldn't agree, and it got to the point where you're Oakland, you can't even have a halfway decent team because you don't have the facility to make enough money to pay the players that you have. And it was really unfair for them. They did a great job building teams, but they just couldn't afford to keep them. And so they're going to go to Nevada, to Las Vegas. I don't know if that's going to work. That seems like a transit type city, but it'll still be a much better situation just because they'll have a state-of-the-art stadium, and we'll see what they can do. I went out there for Dead and Company at the Sphere. Love Vegas. I don't know that there's enough local people to support the team all the time. It may be where whoever they're playing has more fans than they do, but at least they'll be able to make enough revenue to keep their team. That wasn't the case in Oakland. It's sad though. You look at what they were able to accomplish when they moved from Kansas City, and this is what happened. They moved from Philadelphia to Kansas City to Oakland, and when they got to Oakland, Charlie Finley was the owner. And he's the only guy to build a dynasty to win 3 straight World Series other than the Yankees. The Yankees are another franchise, and they've done it a few times to win 3 straight. But they had Reggie Jackson, Vita Blue, Catfish Hunter, a whole host of guys that were part of that franchise that had a dynasty in the early 70s. So it's sad. And look, I lived in Baltimore as a kid. When the Colts left, I know how painful it is. I'm not cheering for the community, but I'm just telling you, same thing with the Colts. If they'd have built the Colts a stadium or worked with them on building them a stadium, they would have stayed in Baltimore. They didn't do it, and they left.
Yeah, exactly. And it all there's a lot of different intricacies. There's a lot of business side, political side of things that, we'll never know, but it's hard to just imagine, like, obviously it would never happen, but imagine how gutted we'd be if the Cubs left, to go somewhere else. And, it's one of those fan bases. The A's have been around for a really long time, and Oakland's really passionate about the A's. So I feel for those fans, and I feel for the players that really loved Oakland. But I'm hoping in the next, couple of years, the organization gets out of its own way and figures things out and creates a really good organization, whether it be in Vegas or not. But one team that is on a crazy run right now, they're kind of on that second half that we really hoped that the Cubs would get hot, like the Detroit Tigers. They are on fire right now. They've played themselves into playoff contention. There, I think, were once 9% chance to make the playoffs, which I'm sure that you guys have seen on the show. The Cubs were in a similar spot. And they are now 85-74 with 3 games to play. They've won 5 in a row and 9 of their last 10. Detroit is the hottest team in baseball.
And they're doing it with young players. It's not like Javi Baez has helped them. I mean, he got the big contract and he's out, They're doing it with young players. And that's what the frustration for me is with the Cubs, is that you got to let the young players play so that they can get good enough to carry you. And you realize when you have a team that's like stuck at 80 wins, the guys that are going to get you over the hump are the young players. The Tigers took their lumps. Don't be surprised if they don't do some damage in the postseason. These guys don't even know that they're not supposed to. And I remember when the Cubs got in 2015, everybody thought they'd be out. They beat the Cardinals. I can still see Schwarber hitting that home run into the scoreboard to right, and us being like, man, we're going to beat the Cardinals. And the Cardinals haven't been the same franchise since, to be honest with you. It's fun to watch them play.
Yeah, it is. And I think they're going to be one of the teams that I think America is going to root for in these playoffs. Hopefully they can finish the job and get in. The other one, a team that's on the total other end of things, making the playoffs. The White Sox have been 1 loss away from avoiding the single season record for 3 games and they swept the Angels. So pretty impressive by the Sox to close out their home series with 3 wins. They had their best attendance of the year because everybody wanted to see them make history, and this is when they win and when everybody's there to watch them lose. But they got 3 more games left against the Tigers, who are red hot. So you got to think the Sox will lose one of these upcoming and be officially the worst team in baseball history.
They will be. I mean, they'll get the record that they deserve to have. It's pretty funny. I saw some pictures of people at some of these games, some of our friends that wanted to go, and it's like, what a bad franchise. They've got to get it figured out. But it's a lot of stubbornness in there. A lot of people that were drafting players, not based on skill, but based on other stuff. And you got to draft the best. You got to develop the best. And so, we'll see what happens. I mean, they traded away their entire roster, fired their manager. They lost a ton of games in a row, and they've been really bad. But sometimes you look at the Tigers. I mean, they were in that spot not too long ago, and now they're rolling into the playoffs. So maybe the White Sox can do that here in the next few years.
Exactly. The Cubs opened their last homestand of the season, 3 games over 500. So a little bit, if they win the series, they finish with the exact same record as last year, which sure would be an interesting thing to analyze. But they play the Reds 3 more games this season. Guys, if you get a chance, go out to Wrigley, make sure you enjoy it, because you won't get to be there for a couple of months more. And obviously we know, if you're watching this channel with us every day, we know how much you love the Cubs. So savor that opportunity and get to Wrigley if you can. But if not, join us on here and we'll be recapping the game tomorrow and for the rest of the season. But for now, guys, thanks so much for joining us here on the Cubs Baseball channel. Keep liking and subscribing, getting in those comment sections, and following us on those social media accounts, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Go Cubs.
Go Cubs.